In this spreadsheet, we're going to demonstrate how to do some calculations in Excel. So what we have here is we have the Nutrition Association, and we want to see how much money they will take in for the year if the membership fee is either 40 euros or 45 euros or 50 euros or finally 55 euros. So here we have various counties and the number of members that they have in this association. So what we want to do is see what the different amounts of money they earn will be if they vary the fees. Okay, so in other words, what will you get in Carlo if the fee is 40 euros versus what you'll get in Carlo if the fee is 45 euros, and so on. So what we want to do here is take the number of members in Carlo, 39, which is in cell C4, and multiply it by D3 rather, and that'll give us the revenue for Carlo. Then for Dublin it'll be C5 by D3. For Kildare it'll be C6 by D3, and so on. So the values here, we're going from C4 to C5 to C6 all the way down to C15, but in the other half of the formula, or other part of the formula to multiply, the D3 bit needs to be constant. The D3 bit won't change. So we can do in Excel is enter in an initial sample formula by typing equals, then clicking on the C4, then multiplying it by D3 and pressing return to record the formula in the cell, and it's 1560 and everyone looks fine. And then we can try and replicate it or fill it down by the black crosshair that you see me floating over now on the right hand side of the cell. So if we do that, we get the total. The cell isn't wide enough, so I need to make it wider to accommodate all of these big numbers that are being generated. And you'll instantly know that these numbers don't really make sense. Because how do you start off with 1560 when it's 39 members at 40 euros a pop? And then when you bring the number down to 20, you're getting this big crazy number. So there's something very suspicious about some of these answers. So in the first case, it's C4 by D3, and that looks correct. The second case, the formula reads C5 by D3. So the C5 bit of it, sorry, is not by D3, it's by D4. So C5 by D4. The C5 part of the formula is okay, we're happy with it. The D4 bit really should be D3. And then if you float down to the next cell, you got D5. Next one is D6 in the corresponding cell. So that part of the formula isn't correct. So what we've got to do here is give a slight little bit more of an adjustment to the formula currently you have in front of you. So we're happy with the C4 part of the formula, but we're not happy with the D3 part of the formula, because the D3 part of the formula is becoming a D4, a D5, a D6 as we proceed down through the individual rows. And the reason this is happening is because we need to lock this formula so it's always sits on cell D3. So it can't change to a D4 or a D5 or a D6, etc. So the way you achieve that is by pressing F4 and pressing return. And then we fill down for the remaining cells. So now we've got more meaningful totals, I think. They look like more realistic totals. And then for the option 2, we can do a similar calculation. Now there's a more efficient way of doing this still. Okay, so this isn't the final way of doing this kind of a solution for this problem. It's a halfway house between what was very efficient versus what's improved but not perfect. Okay, so I'll show you a better way of doing this work later on, but the way we're currently doing it today will still be useful for doing lots of calculations so that you can understand them. So for the 45 euro option, we want to say equals, so we anchor ourselves in our destination, which is cell E4, and we say equals, and then we pick on 39 again, which is cell C4, and we want to multiply it by E3. And we can put in our dollar signs now. We need dollar signs because the E3 needs to stay constant or stay in place all the way down. So we can press F4 to put in the dollar signs. And now we can fill it down. And what you'll notice is that in the second case, the C part of your formula still says C5, but your E part of your formula says E3 again. If you flick down through any one of those cells, you'll start coming across a C, the C reference, or the E reference rather, the E3, but there's dollar signs in front of it. So in this formula, what's happening is the C part of the formula is adjusting, or it's floating. It's going from C4 to C5 to C6 all the way down, whereas the E part of the formula is locked. It stays constantly on cell E3. And likewise, when we get to the third column, third option, we say equals again, and we click on the 39, but on this occasion we wanted to multiply it by 50. So we multiply by 50. If we follow the rules we just learned a moment ago, we're going to use F4, which will put in the dollar signs around the data. And the F4 key, when we press it, makes that dollar sign F $3. So again, the way we'll prove that it works is by filling it down. As we fill it down, the C part of the formula stays the same, but the F part of the formula goes from F3, next time it's F3, and so on, it's F3. So until there's something else cropping up, we're correct. Okay, so we're using here is a mixture of what are called absolutes or relative cell addresses where there's no dollar signs versus absolute cell addresses where you do have to have dollar signs in your formulae, because it'll make your life more efficient and more straightforward. And last but not least, the final part of the formula is going to be equal to the number of members multiplied by the fourth alternative, which is 55 euros. So I need to put dollar signs around the 55 euros. That should be fine. And then fill it down. There are the answers for doing the four calculations, the four options. So obviously what you'll see is that with the 40 euro price, the revenue isn't great. As it goes up, the revenue gains, and the final totals are in column G with option 4. So what we can do next is we can do the totals and the averages and the maxes and the mins. So we're going to go to get the sum, the total. So we go to the home tab, and the sum function on this version of Access is over to the right hand side under sum. And we'll ignore see the 40 now is coming into play as well. It thinks the 40 is part of the calculations. So whatever about the blank line down here in row 16 not being part of the calculations, the 40 cannot be part of the calculation. So we're just selecting the rows that are relevant and leaving out the last row. So that's the total revenue for the option 1 prices, okay? And then what we should be able to do is just fill to our right to get the revenues of the other alternatives. So what's happening here is the first formula said D14 to D15. The second formula, by virtue of me filling it right, says E14 to E4 rather to E15. The third one is F4 to F15. And the fourth one is G4 to G15. So I'll now going to do the average revenue. So it's the same idea as the sum, but we just need an average instead. So with the average revenue, it's the same idea, and it's average, and again the same range of cells from D4 down to D15, and press return. And again we can fill it to our right to repeat the process, and the formula will adjust. For the highest revenue, it's going to be the max. So we anchor in the cell D19 and get the max revenue. And again, it's picking up the wrong cells by mistake. Okay, so we have to go up and make sure we choose the correct cells, and that'll override or cancel the earlier selection. So it'll be D4 to D15, and then we fill right again, and we should be fine. And lastly but not least, it's the minimum, it's the lowest. So we go for min D4 to D15, and what has it done? It's picked D18 to D19 by mistake, so I don't like that, so I'm going to cancel that. Go in and delete the D18, D19, and choose the D4 to D15 alternative. So always be very careful that when you're doing these kind of calculations that as you go down the rows here, it might start trying to work its new calculations based on the stuff around the green area when it should be working on this kind of white area up here at the top. So then we fill that right with the crosshair to repeat the process, and it's done all my calculations. So what's been happening in this example is we're taking formulae that require dollar signs. Okay, so when there's no dollar signs in a cell reference in a formula, It's called a relative cell reference, whereas when we include dollar signs, we call them an absolute cell reference. And that's a very, very important part of learning about Excel, how to use or when to use those two different alternatives. So that's the end of the clip.